How's it going, guys? In this video, I'm going to show you how to install the Zippy spring latch conversion spacers into the HOM Chimera. This mod, we're going to keep the latch, turn it into a spring latch, and reduce the handle bias. So, the first thing you want to do, we're going to leave the latch sex bolt in place for now, but we are going to loosen it a little bit. So to prevent spinning pivots, I'm using a second driver here, and I'm just going to loosen this one a tad. And now I'm going to completely unscrew the other spacer sex bolts. And we can just slide that out. I'm gonna real quick tape the blade because the Chimera is really sharp and I don't want to accidentally cut myself during the installation. I recommend you do the same. Just gonna cut the excess off so I can see where the blade is better. Okay, so you've just successfully removed the bite side stock spacer and the latch is still there. So we're gonna go ahead and install the Zippy spacer now. You can see it only has space for one sex bolt and then this pin, which will go into the other sex bolt hole. The reason it only uses one sex bolt is to reduce the weight. Now, with the shorter curved side that has less jimping facing towards the blade, I'm gonna slide the spacer in and try and push it in. If you can't push it in, I recommend loosening the latch screw a bit more. I had not loosened it enough. And we'll make sure the latch is in the extended position while I do this. And I'm gonna gently push the spacer in. It'll require very gently wedging the handles apart slightly, but you can see I got it in there. The integral pins that are built into the spacer are wedged inside the sex bolt hole. So with that, I'm going to take the sex bolt that we had unscrewed and push it in. And I'm going to use the table as an aid to do this. You can hear it click into place. And I'll go ahead and take that screw we unscrewed and start screwing it in. Before I tighten it too much, I'm going to put my other driver in to prevent spinning pivots, and then I'm going to use the stock spacer as a guide. I'm going to wedge it into the channel just beneath the Zippy spacer, and I'm going to start tightening down that screw. And I'm going to tighten down that screw until I can feel the handles catch on the stock spacer, and it requires force to overcome the friction to pull it out. So you can see I'm trying to pull it out now, but it's not really budging. So I've tightened the spacer a bit too much. I'm going to back it off by maybe a 1/10 of a turn, and now I can pull it out, no problem. We'll repeat that procedure with the latch because I've loosened it. We'll use the driver on the other side to prevent the spinning pivot, and I'm just gonna wedge the Zippy spacer, hold that in with my thumb, just like that, and I'm gonna tighten down this latch screw until I can feel it catching. And we want the latch to have some freedom of movement. So you can see I was able to pop the latch out, but I can't get it back in. So I've over tightened it a bit much. So I'm just gonna very gently loosen it until my latch feels like it has very low friction, and I can slide the stock spacer in between the scales. And I can, but it's still a little tight, so I'm gonna loosen it just a hair more. And my latch can move freely in the fully extended position. So we're gonna test to make sure that, this is why I like to tape the blade. We're gonna test to make sure that the latch can retract, and it can. The retraction's a little bit more resistance than I like, so I'm gonna double check that I've got the spacers to the tension I want, and I'm gonna loosen the latch one just a bit more. And make sure that the latch retracts easily. Do this a few times, make sure you're happy with it, because once we set it, we don't really want to mess with it again. Now, this is moving a bit too easily, the stock spacer, so I'm going to tighten down that second sex bolt just a hair more. Looks like when I tightened the latch spacer, it straightened out the handles, which changed the tension here. And that's good. And I'll just double check. Free swinging, the latch, and retraction is easy with just your thumb. That's where we want it. I'm gonna double check to make sure there's no gaps. Looks good. Integral pins aligned, no gaps. Integral pins aligned on the other side. So that looks good. So we've just finished the bite side. Let's do the safe side. First thing I want to do before we disassemble, you're going to receive 3 tungsten balls with your safe side spacer. These tungsten balls are designed to counterweight the weight of the latch and the bite handle so that you still have really good flipping balance even when you're using the latch. The way Jerry HOM designed this to have the retractable latch is extremely helpful in this regard, as it reduces the mechanical advantage or the leverage the latch has. But the final step we want to do to improve the balance is to counterweight the safe spacer to compensate for the weight of the latch. And we are going to use these tungsten balls to do that, if I can stop knocking things over on my desk. So I actually, sorry for the shaky camera, I'm just looking for the tool I use to do it, which is the tip of a clicky pen. So pop that in, 1, 2, 3. So if you receive it and these are not already installed, I recommend counterweighting the safe spacer to compensate the weight of the latch. If you're using these spacers without the latch, 1, I recommend you use the flush spacers instead for more jimping and a nicer aesthetic with no latch in. But if you're using these spring latch spacers without the latch, you do not need to put these tungsten weights in. All right, let's go ahead and remove the safe side spacer. Use my driver. If you don't have spinning pivots, you don't need to use the driver, but typically with this type of design, you'll need one. And I'm going to use a 1.5 millimeter hex key to just push out the sex bolts. And we'll just be able to slide the stock safe spacer out. And now we'll take our Zippy safe spacer with the tungsten weights installed. And I'm going to gently push it in. You may need to very gently pry the handles apart to wedge it in. And it'll just click into place when you've got the integral pin into that sex bolt hole on both sides. Now we'll take one of these sex bolts. I like to use the table as I did with the bite side sex bolt and just push it in. Everything should just click into place. And I'm going to start screwing this in. We use our driver again. Before I get too tight, I'm going to take the stock spacer and just wedge it into the channel below the Zippy spacer. And I'm going to tighten until the handles catch on the stock spacer. So this is coming out a little too easily. I like to have more friction, so I'm going to tighten a little more. Put my driver back in and tighten a little more. Too much friction, I over tightened. Gonna back it off. Back it off again. Should just slide right out with some friction, but you shouldn't have to fight it. And there you go. Perfect. And this safe side uses only one sex bolt. We do that to cut down on the weight. I'm going to make sure that the pin is aligned, the jimping is positive, nothing's out of place, and there are no gaps on either side. And you've just installed the safe side spacer as well. So my tape is interfering with the close, so I'm going to rip that off. And let's test the latch. So if you've installed it properly, you should be able to latch it shut, just like that. There will be this green nubbin, for lack of a better technical term. Actually, I'm in charge here. The technical term is nubbin. And when we squeeze the handles together, the latch will open and you can just retract it. So let's try this again. Boom. So it doesn't function exactly the same way as a spring latch, which will always put tension to prevent it from falling forward. This can still bend like that. But the nice thing about this design is, like a spring latch, you can do a one-handed open. And because we've removed a sex bolt from either handle and reduced the weight of the spacer itself, and added jimping, and counterweighted the safe handle to compensate for the latch, you can actually flip the Chimera V2 with the latch and have great balance for flipping. One thing I will note, I have tested the plastic fatigue of this design extensively over the course of a handful of weeks now. And what I've noticed is if you store it latched overnight for days on end, it'll still spring open, but the spring open will get slightly less energetic over time. So what I like to do when I carry this, when I EDC it, I just leave it latched. But if I'm gonna store it overnight or for days or weeks on end, put it in my case, I'll just retract the latch instead of keeping it latched. And that will mitigate the plastic fatigue and extend the life of the spring latch. And again, I'll emphasize that I have tested the plastic fatigue extensively. And if you do store it and leave it overnight in the latched closed position, you will still be able to spring it open. But there's something satisfying about having that really powerful spring. So if it wears out, you can always buy a new one, but I've had great success storing it like so. Anyway, that's the end of the video. You have just successfully installed the Zippy spring latch spacers on the HOM Chimera V2. Thanks for watching, guys.